Tonight, I have the opportunity of sharing with you how astronomy and physics brought me to faith in Jesus Christ 8 years before I got to know a Christian. And if you go to our book table, you'll see cards that are similar to this. And if you fill that out, we're actually going to give you a free DVD where I share in much more detail than I have tonight how physics and astronomy brought me to faith in Jesus Christ. It also features me fielding questions from skeptics. So it's a free gift for you this evening. But my story is that I was raised in Canada. I grew up in British Columbia, a really beautiful place, but Christians are hard to find in Canada. I didn't really get to know a Christian, at least to get to know a Christian well, until I was 27 years of age. And that's happened when I arrived on the Caltech campus. Caltech is loaded with believers. So that's really where I had my first exposure to Christians. However, I did get to meet some stars and galaxies when I was 7 years of age. And that happened because I was walking with my parents in the evening and said, "Mom, Dad, are those stars hot?" They said, "Yes, the stars are hot." I said, "Please tell me why they're hot." And they said, "You got to go to the library," which is exactly what I did. And I came home with 5 books on physics and astronomy, and I did that every week. Every week I would go to the public library and bring home these books. And ever since I was 7 years of age, I have been deeply fascinated by the universe of galaxies, stars, and the planets. And by the time I was 8 years of age, I knew that my future career would lie in astrophysics. And that's what led me to make some unexpected discoveries, because what happened from the age of 8 onwards is I would pick a particular subdiscipline of astronomy and give that an in-depth study. So one year I looked at stellar interiors, another year at the atmospheres of stars and the structure of galaxies. And when I was 16, I devoted a year to studying cosmology. Now that's not the same as cosmetology. There really is a difference. Cosmology is the science of the origin and history of the universe. And that was a time when there was a lot of debate going on. Is it a steady state universe? Is it an oscillating universe? Is it a Big Bang universe? And there were 2 or 3 other theories. But at that time, the evidence was heavily favoring that it was indeed a Big Bang universe. And if it's Big Bang, that means there's a beginning. And if there's a beginning, there must be a beginner. And so starting in age 17, I went on a quest to find the beginner of the universe. And I first looked for that beginner in the writings of Immanuel Kant, because he's the father of modern cosmology. And he writes about God. But what he wrote in his Critique of Pure Reason is that space and time have existed for eternity. And I knew that was incorrect. Space and time didn't exist until the universe came into existence. And he had other ideas that were not fitting what I knew to be true about astronomy. I went to Descartes, I went to a few other philosophers, and finally I gave up on these philosophers and began to look at the holy books of the religions of the world. And I began with Hinduism and the Hindu Vedas. But I discovered in Hinduism, they teach that we live in a reincarnating universe, a universe that goes through endless cycles of rebirths, where the universe is born, it dies, it's reborn, it dies again, but with a cycle of 4.32 billion years. And I knew that number was not correct. I also knew that the universe had an entropy measure that was 100 million times too high to permit the possibility of a rebirth of the universe. And so I put Hinduism aside. Now, the high school I went to in Vancouver was predominantly Asian. We had a lot of Buddhists, and so they encouraged me to look at the Buddhist commentaries. I discovered that Buddhism teaches the same cosmology as Hinduism. And we had a couple of students in our high school that were Muslims. I looked at the Quran, and I noted that the creation texts in the Quran contradicted one another. One of them implied that the planets were more distant than the stars. And even with a naked eye, we know that that is incorrect. There was a gentleman in our school who was of the Baha'i faith, and he says, he was looking at my studies, and he says, what we do in Baha'i is we take the kernels of truths from all the different religions and we put them together into a consistent package. I says, great, show me what you got. A week later, I went back to him and said, well, from what I can tell, what's happened in Baha'i, they take all the errors of the world's religions and put them together into an inconsistent package. And he said, well, show me what you've got. And he wound up leaving the Baha'i faith. Now, when I told you earlier that I didn't get to know Christians until I was 27 years of age, I actually did see some from a distance when I was growing up. So, for example, when I was 11 years of age, there were two men that came into our public school and put 2 boxes on our teacher's desk and left without saying a single word. But in those boxes were Gideon Bibles. And we're all invited to take one. And every one of us did. My Gideon Bible stayed on my shelf, untouched, unread, for 6 years. And in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't pick it up right away, because the Gideons gave me a foreign language edition that we call the King James translation. But the benefit of a high school education in Canada is starting in grade 7, we would go through 2 of William Shakespeare's plays every year. So by the time I was 17, I was fluent in King James English. And so I picked up this Gideon Bible. And what I noticed in going through that Gideon Bible is it repeatedly said something I didn't see in any other holy book. Everything must be tested. Don't believe until you first put it to the test. But if it passes the test, accept it. As Paul says in Thessalonians, everything is to be tested, but hold fast to that which proves to be true. And I found this repeated throughout the Bible. I didn't see this in any other holy book. But the other thing I noticed about the Bible is that it perfectly followed the scientific method. Now, I hear it's different here in America, but in Canada, we're taught the scientific method in grade 1. We're taught it in grade 2. We're taught it in grade 3. We get it every single year. But none of my public school teachers told me where the scientific method came from. When I picked up my Gideon Bible, every time the Bible spoke about creation, the scientific method leapt off the page. And what I realized is the Bible not only commands objective testing, it tells us step by step how everything is to be put to the test. And what I discovered was it was no accident that the scientific revolution exploded out of Reformation Europe. During the Reformation, people were encouraged to read the Bible for themselves. And those with a scientific bent saw this biblical testing method, they applied it to their science, and that was the birth of the scientific method, and that's what launched the scientific revolution. And I reckon